This video is going to show how we can use some of Tony Kuiper's luminosity masks to help get rid of the halos that are left on HDR images quite often. So to start, let's take the software you're in and do a file open, and you can go to the documents that I provided for this activity, and the folder was called Getting Rid of Halos. And there's a PDF that you can look at, or I'm going to go to the folder I've provided of images. And in that there is one image that matches the image on the tutorial I've provided. But I want us to use the other ones here. So at the top you see Getting Rid of HDR Halos PDF. That PDF goes with the tutorial example. We're going to use the other three images. And I'm going to select all three of those and go and click Open. I want them to be tabbed together, so I'm going to the Window menu to the word Images, and it says Consolidate All to Tabs. You may have them automatically set up like this, but that isn't my default. And I have three different images that were made through HDR and ended up with those halos that can appear where the dark and the light edges come together in an HDR image. So what we're going to do is use a luminosity mask to help us hide those extremely bright halos around the building and along the dark bushes here. And so to do this, you could first say, I wonder what luminosity selection will help define the area that I want to darken without darkening much else. So I'm going to show you a technique. If you're not familiar with what might be the appropriate selection, if you go to the Action panel, and if you go to the Set Made for TK Levels, these will provide adjustment layers with a mask attached to them. And we know that we're wanting to focus in on the brights. And so I'm going to say maybe it could be number 2, 3, or 4. I don't know which one will really focus in on the halos. So I'm going to choose 3 of these TK levels, the one that's Light Lights 2, and then Bright Lights 3, and Super Lights 4. You can add the Control or Command key, or you can use the Shift key to collect those 3. And once they're chosen, we're going to open these 3 adjustment layers. And each one has a different mask attached to it. And the reason I'm doing this is so we can look at the mask and say which one has the lightest area really zeroing in on the problem halos. So let's start with Light Lights 2. In order to look at that well, we hold the Alt or Option key down and click on the mask. And here you'll see it does show the halos, but it really goes quite a bit beyond. It goes up into the sky and picks up other areas. And let's see if there's a better one. So to get back to the image, you repeat Alt or Option key, click on the mask. Try Bright Lights 3. Alt Option, click on the mask. Oh, it's gotten rid of some of the extreme brightness of the other one, and it seems to be a better pick for the halos. So maybe I will use that. But let me go back to the image. Alt Option, click on the mask. Let's try Super Lights 4, which zeroes in on very bright parts of the image. You'll notice it's so bright it doesn't really get to the halos very well at all. So we know that the Super Lights 4 isn't going to be a good selection. And we pretty much have decided that the Bright Lights 3 will give us about the right selection to do the job. Once we've done that, and you can remember Bright Lights 3, we don't need these layers any longer. They were there to help us look at the selection. So I'm going to select and click those 3 that I just used. I don't want them anymore, so I'm going to delete them. Layer, Delete Layers, and click OK or Yes. So we're back where we started, but we've learned that the luminosity mask that will zero in on the halos is bright lights 3. Sometimes you get to know that already, but when you're learning, that's how you make that discovery. So I am going to duplicate the background. So I'm going to do Command Control J, or you can say Layer, Duplicate Layer, and open it. So on this layer, I'm going to want to darken the image. And at first, the whole image will darken. But then I'm going to add a mask which masks away all but the brighter part of the image, which is what we want. So the first thing we do is take this background copy and change the blend mode to multiply. If you've used multiply with me before, you know it will darken the entire image. And we don't want to darken everything. We want to focus our work on the Bright Lights 3 selection. So let's first add a mask to that. So here's the little mask thing, add a layer mask. And I would like to start out by hiding all of that darkness that the multiply gave us. So the way you hide all of the effect of that layer is to change the mask to black. So you'll see the mask is selected, the lights around it. If I use Control on Windows or Command on Mac and type an I for invert, that mask will turn black. So let's do that. So what we have is a hidden layer where the darkening is taking place. And the mask said we can't see the effect at all. But this is what we know. If we create a selection for Bright Lights 3, it will limit the work we do to just that part of the image that is included in the Bright Lights 3. So what we're going to do is go to the Action panel. You can close the TK Levels group because we're going to use TK Selections. And we've decided the selection that will work best is Bright Lights 3. So if you will highlight Bright Lights 3 and go to the play button, and it will play the selection on top of the image. It's important for me to remind you that when you see the crawling ants of a TK selection, you are only seeing the part of the selection that's at least 50% going to be changed. There are areas around that that will be more delicately changed, but they don't show up as the selection. Just so you understand, more will change than what you see in the crawling ants. Before we paint through that selection, I like to hide the crawling ants. I don't much like to look at them. I don't want to lose the selection, but I want to hide the crawling ants. So if you hold down your Control on Windows, Command on Mac, and type an H, they will hide. They are still there. So when I paint, I'm still using that selection to paint through. If you want to prove they're still there, do the Command or Control H again, and they come back. So I'm going to hide them again. And then I'm going to go to a paintbrush from the tool palette, and I have to decide what color am I painting with. Well, if I have black, which is hid the adjustment, and I want to cut through and see the adjustment in certain areas, I must use white. So down on your foreground, be sure it's white. And then the next thing you look at is the opacity of this brush. If I were to use it at 100%, the first time I brush on the image, I'm going to completely knock out all of the brightness that's controlled by the mask. And then if it's too much, I've got to get rid of it and go back. So I tend to paint, when I'm painting through a luminosity mask, I get somewhere around 50% opacity. That means I won't get the complete effect. In other words, I won't completely cut through that black mask. It's going to enable us to paint back the bright halos and not disturb the rest of the light in the image. And in order to paint over those, we must be working on the mask. Very important before you paint through a selection on a mask that you look at the layer panel to be sure that you haven't gotten yourself back on the image part of that layer. You want to be on the mask so that you can paint there. So I have a brush and it's white, and I'm going to choose to leave the opacity at about 50% so that I gradually make the changes. And I notice my ants, crawling ants, are visible, and I would like to hide them. So either Command on a Mac or Control on Windows, and the letter H hides them temporarily. The selection is still there. So I'm going to start painting on the mask with this 50% white. And remember, what this mask is hiding is that multiply adjustment. So if I come back and paint over it, I'm darkening the areas that are most available through the mask. And once wasn't enough, I can go back and paint again to bring it down more. At any time I want to check to see what I've done, I can go and hide this layer which has all of the work in it. And when I do, I can see it get brighter and darker, but the effect is too gentle. So I'm going to raise my opacity all the way up. I've tested it enough to know it's not going to overdo the job. So now my white on that mask is going to be painted in at its full potential, and it's going to reveal all of the darkening I can do. So let me go and come back over this again and go around the edge. And I might even like to darken that one very bright cloud. But after I've done 100% on this, I can reveal the before and after by pointing at the eyeball. And when I click it to turn it off, you can see the full glow come back, and then it comes down. And I noticed that I actually think this is too bright in this area. But I don't know whether I want to cut it back a lot, but it certainly is covered by that multiply. So I'm going to go and reduce the opacity back to about 50%. And I'm going to brush over the clouds that are very bright there. And if I think I want to do it more than once, I can. And I'm bringing that bright area just down a little bit. Let's see what I've done. Go to the eyeball in front of the layer we're working on. Here's the before, and here's the after. Since I did my brushing at 100%, I've achieved all of the darkening of that halo that I can achieve through this method. But you might like to see, what did you actually brush on? So now let's look at the mask that you've been painting on. Hold the Alt or Option key, click on the mask. It tells you where your brush strokes have gone. Can you see where you've been working? And even though my brush went out further than that, it was protected by the selection, and I'd only changed the areas that were selected, which were the brighter areas of the image. So an Alt Option click again, I'm back to the image. Now, it's important for me to remember that it is still selected. If you want to see that, try the hide command again. Control or Command H. Yeah, they're still there. I'm going to hide them. There is a suggestion that has come through Tony Kuiper that in some cases you may want to get more of a halo darkened than you can do here. And this is the way you add to it. Go up to the Layers panel to the Torn Edge icon that gets you a new layer. Click on it. On this layer, I could work directly to darken this glow because I'm still working on a selection. If you aren't sure, unhide it. Well, it's still there. So if I want to take a very low darkening, maybe I can use my paintbrush with black, not white. Black will darken, but really lower the opacity to 10% or less. So it's a very delicate change. Now I can paint black on this extra layer through the selection and darken it a bit more. So let me go up here and do what I did before and just bring down that brightness a little bit more along the edge of the bush and the building. I did it only one stroke at 11% is where mine is set. I wonder what a difference it made. Go to that new layer and in the front where you see the eyeball, click the eyeball. Can you see that you made some darkening? If it's not enough, you can go back with your brush, add about 8 to 10%, and go over it again. Now what you're doing is darkening through the mask. And now, if I think the halos are tamed, and I want to know what the whole result is, I want to hide this extra panel that's in my way here. Now I see my work. If I come down to the background original layer and I hold the Alt or Option key down and click on the mask of the background layer, I'll hide all the work I did. There's how the image started out with its halos, and this is how it ended. So in this particular case, where the halos were pretty vivid, I did the best I could do on the multiply layer, and then I wanted to do a little more, so I added a new layer and kept that luminosity selection in place. So when I painted with a black brush at low opacity, my strokes were limited by the selection, and they didn't affect anything else in the image. One of the reasons why painting through a luminosity mask is useful is it allows you to completely control where the change occurs. It only occurs where you paint. So although there were other areas affected by that mask I put there, the selection actually went out, affected a lot of other things. I didn't want to change the clouds that were light, so I didn't brush over them. It gives me very good control of that.